Arizona Territory. 1879. The wind carried dust across the dry bones of what used to be Bisbee, now nothing more than a sun-baked shell of a mining town, left to the snakes and silence. Jovie Neal's boots scraped against the cracked ground as she stepped through the warped doorway of the abandoned general store, one hand on the small of her aching back, the other resting protectively over the swell of her belly. 8 months along and walking across the edge of nowhere, she had not seen another soul in 2 days. Her canteen was empty. Her lips were cracked, but her eyes were sharp, determined. She had not come looking for salvation. She had come because she had nowhere else left to go. The wind moaned through broken windows as she moved through the dust-coated shelves. Cans rusted through. A mouse darted out from under a sack of flour turned to stone. She leaned against the counter and inhaled slow, shallow breaths to steady herself. The child inside shifted, a quiet reminder she was not alone. Then from the street came the clop of hooves. Jovie straightened, her fingers curling around the edge of the counter as the sound drew closer. A horse. One rider. She could tell by the rhythm. She reached for the small pistol tucked under the edge of her shawl. She had not fired it in weeks. She hoped she would not need to now. The door creaked open. A man stepped in, tall and broad-shouldered. Dust clung to his coat and hat. Sun-dark skin. Deep lines around his eyes. His gaze swept the store, landed on her, and paused. He held up his hands slowly. "I ain't here to scare you," he said, voice low and calm. "Name's Porter Vale. I work a few miles west at the Willoughby Ranch. Saw your tracks." Jovie did not lower the pistol. "You followed me?" "No," he said. "I saw them by the dry creek bed. They looked tired, like someone needed help." She hesitated. The weight of the pistol in her hand shook a little now. "I have water," he added. "And jerky, if you want it." Her throat ached at the word. "Water." She nodded once. He reached carefully into his saddlebag, pulled out a battered canteen, and walked forward, slow and steady, like approaching a scared animal. He placed it on the counter beside her, then stepped back. Jovie took it with both hands and drank. The water was warm, tasted faintly of leather, but it felt like life. She drank until she had to stop to breathe. "Thank you," she murmured. "You alone?" Porter asked gently. She nodded. "My wagon broke an hour east of here. The horse died. I walked." "Where were you headed?" She looked down at the round of her belly. "I do not know anymore." Porter studied her. "You got family?" "No one left," she said. "My husband died in Kansas. Fever. The farm went under. I sold what I could and left. Thought I could find something better out west. I was wrong." He glanced out the window. The sun had started its slow drop toward the horizon. "That baby of yours is not going to wait long," he said. "You should not be out here alone. I do not have a choice." "You do now." She looked up at him. "I can take you back to the ranch," he said. "It is not fancy, but it is dry, and the cook makes a good stew. You need rest, a bed, someone around when it is time." Jovie tightened her fingers around the canteen. "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Porter shrugged. "Because no one should have to bring a child into the world alone." She stared at him. There was no pity in his eyes, just quiet steadiness. "I will go," she said finally, voice low. Outside, the shadows stretched longer. Porter helped her onto his horse, climbing up behind her to steady her with one strong arm. She tensed at first until she felt the way he kept his hand respectful at her side, not touching more than he had to. They rode west, wind catching her hair, the town disappearing behind them. The ranch was a simple spread of land tucked against the base of the hills. A long barn, a few scattered cabins, a stretch of corral fencing. Smoke rose from the chimney of the main house. A dog barked once and ran to greet them. As he helped her down, Jovie's legs buckled. Porter caught her gently, his arm around her waist now, firm and sure. "I have got you," he said. She looked up at him, her face inches from his chest. His shirt smelled of sweat and saddle leather and dust. She let herself lean into him, just for a moment. He led her inside the cabin he stayed in, made up the bed with clean sheets, brought her a bowl of stew and a slice of bread. She ate slowly, silently, watching him move around the room with easy confidence. He kept glancing back at her, like measuring her strength, her comfort. She had not seen a man look at her like that since before her husband fell ill. That night, she lay in his bed alone while he took the cot across the room. The baby moved under her ribs. She closed her eyes and felt safe for the first time in weeks. In the morning, Porter brought her tea. Not just water, but actual tea. Mint leaves steeped in hot water. "You are staying," he said. Not a question. Just simple truth. She nodded. The days passed slow and warm. Jovie helped in the kitchen when she could. Porter checked the fences, rode out with the cattle, came back dusty and quiet. Every evening, he brought her something small, a book, a ripe peach, a blanket stitched by his mother years ago. "You were kind," she told him one night, sitting beside him on the porch steps. He looked at her, the lines near his mouth softening. "You make it easy." Jovie turned her face toward the stars. "I did not expect to find anything out here." "Me neither," he said. "But then I saw you. And I knew." She looked at him, heart-thudding. "Knew what?" "That I had been waiting for something real." He did not try to kiss her. He just reached over and took her hand in his, warm and strong. She did not pull away. The baby came 2 weeks later in the middle of a thunderstorm. Porter was there, holding her hand, wiping her brow, not leaving her side once. The ranch cook, an older woman named Hattie, helped her through it. After hours of pain and sweat and screaming, Jovie held a baby girl, wet and red-faced and perfect. They named her Maribel. Porter held the child in his arms like she was made of glass. Jovie watched him, her heart full. "You are not alone anymore," he whispered to her. And she believed him. Maribel slept soundly in the cradle Porter built from scrap pine and a broken wagon wheel. Jovie traced its edges one morning as sunlight filtered through the cabin window, warming the floorboards. Her stitches still pulled when she bent to lift the baby, but her hands had grown steady again, not from habit, but from care. Porter stood outside, driving nails into a fence gate that had sagged overnight. His shirt stuck to his shoulders in the heat, sawdust clinging to his forearms. Every hammer strike was measured, not rushed. Jovie watched him through the open door, not speaking, but not needing to. Later, she stepped out with a tin cup of boiled chicory. He took it with a quiet nod. "You sleep. Enough to keep going," she said, drawing the shawl tighter around her. "Maribel's lungs are strong." "That's a good sign." Jovie leaned against the post, her gaze drifting toward the hills. "I used to think about Colorado. Before the farm failed. I heard stories about those high valleys. Cold rivers. Narrow passes. I wonder if it's as green as they say." Porter drank, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "I rode through Durango once. Snow in May. A man could smell pine even before he saw the trees." She turned her head toward him. "You've been farther than this." He nodded. "I followed cattle trails north for a while. Spent 2 winters near the Washita. Tried card dealing in Fort Smith. Didn't suit me." "Why'd you stop here?" Porter rested the cup on the fence post. "I got tired of moving. Tired of leaving things behind." Jovie's fingers moved to the edge of her apron. "I never learned how to stay." He looked at her, long enough that the silence filled up with meaning. "You might not have to learn it alone," he said. The wind stirred dry grass along the slope. A hawk circled high above the mesa. That afternoon, Hattie stopped by with a basket of cloth scraps for swaddling. She was a woman of few words, but she stayed long enough to show Jovie how to wrap the baby tighter for cooler nights. When she left, she paused at the door. "You've changed how he walks," she said, not looking back. "Like a man who's got something to protect now." Jovie touched her cheek, unsure what to say. In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of the ranch folded her in. She learned how to carry Maribel on her back with a length of cotton, how to stir cornbread batter one-handed, how to split kindling without jarring her hips. Porter brought her a slat-backed rocker from the barn, smoothed down with oil. She sat in it when she fed the baby, watching the shadows stretch across the yard each evening. One morning, while Porter was shoeing a colt, Jovie stepped into the corral with a brush. The gelding startled at first, but she clicked her tongue low and steady, laying her hand on its flank. "You handle yourself calm," Porter said from behind her as he straightened, hammer in hand. "I raised a pair of oxen once," she replied. They spooked easy, but they feared silence more than noise. He grinned slow. You ever think about staying on? She didn't answer right away. The colt flicked its ears as she ran the brush along its side. I think about how fast things change, she said. I think about not wanting to run anymore. That evening, Porter cooked beans over a mesquite fire. Jovie wrapped Maribel against her chest and sat beside him, knees touching. Crickets sang in the brush, and the smell of smoke clung to their clothes. She's got your eyes, Porter said, glancing toward the baby. She has her father's chin, Jovie answered softly. Porter stirred the pot, then set the spoon down. You talk about him less now. I talk when it matters, she said. He was good to me. But I'm not meant to stay in mourning. He looked at her then, not with curiosity, but with understanding. I know what it is to carry someone's ghost, he said. But ghosts don't need shelter. You do. Jovie turned slightly, studying him. You'd give it to me? I already did, he said. Every time I came back from riding fence and hoped you'd still be here. She reached for his hand, not out of fear, not out of need, but choice. When he folded his fingers around hers, it was without urgency. Just certainty. Inside, the cradle creaked gently. Outside, the fire crackled low. That night, with Maribel asleep between them, Jovie whispered, I think I've found what I didn't know to look for. Porter didn't answer with words. He reached across the blankets and touched her wrist, his thumb brushing her pulse. They lay like that until the moon rose, steady and full, and neither of them let go. The first frost came early that year, settling in thin white lace across the porch rail and stiffening the morning air. Jovie stepped out with Maribel wrapped snug beneath her shawl, the smell of wood smoke drifting from the chimney behind her. Porter stood near the corral, rubbing down the roan gelding with slow, even strokes. His breath showed in the air, curling upward like a signal. She crossed the yard, boots crunching over frozen dirt. You always start before sunrise? He didn't turn. Horses don't wait on comfort. Neither does winter. Maribel stirred slightly, nestling deeper against her. You ever think about raising something steadier than cattle? Porter moved to the gelding's other side. Sometimes. But dirt don't give back unless you got time and water. And this land holds both close. Jovie leaned against the post. We had a well in Kansas, but it kept turning sour. My husband tried digging another, but the ground just gave a stone. He looked up. You think about going back? No, she said. That place buried too much. The wind picked up, carrying a dry rustle from the mesquite. Porter tied off the blanket across the horse's back and stepped closer, his boots dragging a faint line through the frost. I cleared the stable room, he said. Figured we could store preserves come spring. Jovie narrowed her eyes. You're planning that far ahead now? He met her gaze. Only since someone started leaving jars of stewed apples on the shelf. She smiled, faint and true. I'll need more lids if we're keeping things through summer. We'll ride to Tombstone after the next supply run. I'll cover the wagon if you drive it. Maribel made a soft noise, half yawn, half sigh. Jovie rocked slightly, watching the sky lighten behind the hills. She'll be walking before long. She'll follow you, then Porter said, voice quiet. Strong-footed. Jovie looked down at her daughter, then back at him. She already watches you like she knows something. He reached out, fingertips brushing the edge of the shawl. What's she telling you? That we're not drifting anymore. He didn't answer, but the way his chest rose and fell told her enough. Later that week, Porter brought back a long-handled axe and a bundle of hickory slats. He set them down by the porch, glancing toward the door. Figured we could build a cradle that rocks smoother. That one creaks when the wind shifts. Jovie dried her hands on her apron and knelt beside the bundle. You know how to bend wood properly? I watched my uncle do it once. Burned his thumb clean through, but the chair's still in my cousin's house. She laughed a low, surprised sound. Well, I'll boil water and you fetch the draw knife. Fair trade. He tipped his hat. Fair as I've known. Evenings grew shorter. The air held a sharpness that turned their breath white and hurried their steps toward the hearth. Inside, the cabin became more than a shelter. It became theirs. One night, as wind rattled the shutters, Jovie settled Maribel into the new cradle and turned toward the small table where Porter sat sharpening a blade. She pulled out the opposite chair, resting her elbows on the wormwood. You ever miss what you left? He paused. Sometimes I remember the sound of rain on a tin roof. We had one over the smokehouse. I'd lie awake just listening. She nodded. I miss the smell of baking bread on a cold morning. My mother always used a bit of molasses in hers. Porter set the blade aside. Do you want to try planting wheat come spring? Jovie's eyes flicked upward. You think this land can take it? We can try a small patch near the wash. If nothing grows, we've still got each other. Each other, she said, like testing the shape of the words. Porter reached across the table, his hand steady. I never asked what you want now, not what brought you here, but what you'd choose if there was no weight on your back. Jovie thought for a long time before answering. I want to wake up knowing the people I love are within reach. I want to cook over my own stove. I want to hear my daughter laugh in the dirt. She looked at him, voice softening, someone to build a life with, piece by piece. He didn't speak right away. The fire crackled low, casting shifting gold along his face. I've been waiting to offer you that, he said. But it had to be when you were ready. I'm ready now, Porter. He stood, came around the table, and knelt beside her chair. He rested a hand over hers, warm and sure. We'll build it slow, he said. But it'll last. Jovie bent forward until their foreheads touched. Not rushed. Not uncertain. Just two lives finally leaning in the same direction. Outside, the wind eased. Inside, the cradle rocked in perfect rhythm with the quiet breath of the home they had made. By early December, frost clung longer to the eaves and the wind bit sharper through the cottonwoods skirting the creek. Porter had hung an oilcloth across the porch to keep the cold from settling too deep into the cabin, but the chill still crept in under the door before dawn. Jovie wrapped Maribel in a quilt stitched from worn shirts and sat by the fire, coaxing heat from a few stubborn coals. The baby's breath came slow and even, her fingers curled against her mother's chest. Porter returned from the barn with his shoulders dusted in straw and the scent of hay clinging to his coat. He set a tin pail beside the hearth and crouched to feed the fire. She's growing faster than I expected, he said, nodding toward the bundle in her arms. Jovie adjusted the quilt. Her legs keep pushing the seams. I'll have to unpick the hem on her gown by next week. He stood and poured water into the kettle, then reached for the bread crust left from supper. I was thinking. When the weather turns, we could ride out to the county seat. There's a man with tools for hire. I could trade for a hand plow. Jovie watched the flames catch along the kindling. You planning to stay long enough to need one? His voice came quietly. I already am. She looked up at him then, her eyes steady. I don't want to stay the hired woman at someone else's place. I want to put a name to what this is. Porter leaned back, arms crossed. You would take mine? I would, she said. If it's offered in truth. His face didn't change, but something in his stance eased. I'll ask proper then. When you're ready. Her voice softened. I'm ready now. He glanced toward the cradle, then back to her. We'll speak with the circuit rider when he passes through. Old Reverend Tills makes his way out this far every few months. Jovie nodded. That'll do. Later that day, Porter walked the ridge above the pasture, checking for gaps in the stone wall that helped keep the cattle from wandering too far east. He took the long way back, past the dry gully where the mesquite grew thick and low. When he returned, Jovie was chopping carrots with the side of a worn knife, Maribel swaying in a sling across her front. He brushed his hands clean and leaned against the counter. I've been thinking about adding onto the cabin. Just a lean-to for storage, maybe a second room once spring comes. Jovie placed the blade aside. We'll need it. She'll want space to crawl before too long. We could build it by hand, he said. I've still got nails left from the fence work, and there's oak along the west draw. I'll help, she said. I've set beams before. Notched them too. He looked at her with quiet pride. I figured you had. That night, after the stew was cleared and Maribel slept with her cheek against wool, Jovie stepped outside. The stars were sharp and cold, clustered tight above the hills. Porter followed her out, handing her a tin mug with the last of the warm cider. You ever think about what she'll be? He asked, nodding toward the darkened window. Sometimes, Jovie said, but mostly I think about what we'll give her. Porter's breath clouded the air. A place that holds. She turned to him. And people who stay. He touched her shoulder just above the shawl's edge. I never thought I'd settle again. But this doesn't feel like giving something up. It feels like finding something I didn't know I'd lost. Her eyes didn't leave his. Then don't let it slip. He stepped closer, cupping her cheek with a hand rough from rope and sun, and kissed her, slow and sure, like sealing a promise. The air between them warmed, not from fire but from knowing. Inside, the cradle rocked gently once, then stilled. The Reverend rode in on a mule with a split ear and a saddle worn thin with age. He arrived 2 days after the last of the snow melted off the ridgeline, dust trailing behind him in lazy spirals. Porter met him at the gate with a handshake and a tin of tobacco leaves, while Jovie stood on the porch in a dress she'd let down at the hem that morning, her hair braided back in neat rows. The ceremony was held beneath the cottonwood tree behind the cabin, where early shoots of wild onion pushed up through the thawed earth. Hattie brought a pie and stood off to the side with her arms folded, nodding once when the vows were spoken. Maribel, nestled in Jovie's arms, blinked at the sky and yawned. Porter took Jovie's hand as the Reverend spoke the final words, his thumb resting gently over her knuckles. Well, the Reverend said, tightening the strap on his mule, if the ground don't give way under your feet, you're likely to hold. Porter gave a quiet laugh. We're built for staying. They signed the ledger and sent the Reverend off with a jar of pickled green beans and a strip of smoked bacon wrapped in butcher's paper. As his mule trotted down the trail, Jovie turned to Porter. We'll need to mark the date, she said, so Maribel knows what we stood on. He reached for her waist and pulled her close. I'll carve it into the beam above the hearth. Spring pressed forward in fits, days of warm wind broken by late cold snaps that crept in overnight. Jovie stitched new curtains for the window above the wash basin using muslin traded from Hattie in exchange for a jar of plum preserves. Porter laid the foundation for the lean-to, setting stones by hand with his sleeves rolled to the elbow. Maribel babbled more now, reaching for whatever passed into her line of sight. One morning, as Jovie kneaded dough at the table, Porter came in with a splinter in his palm and a red flush across his cheekbones. She's trying to say something, he said, holding out his hand for her to examine. She's been humming in her sleep, Jovie said, teasing the splinter out with a needle. Sounds like a song without words. She's got your quiet ways, he murmured. Jovie tied a scrap of cloth around his hand and kissed the knuckles. She watches, then moves. They built the lean-to over the course of 3 weeks, the final boards nailed in place just before the rain returned. Inside, they stored the plow, sacks of flour, and a crate of tools Porter had kept wrapped in oilcloth since Missouri. The space smelled of new wood and earth. By June, the wash ran with shallow water again, and Jovie planted rows of beans and squash along the fence line. She carried Maribel in a sling while she worked, singing low to the soil. Porter dug out a shallow ditch to help the water reach the roots, pausing now and then to glance toward the porch where the rocker stood empty in the shade. One evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Jovie sat on the porch steps, legs stretched out, Maribel asleep against her chest. Porter handed her a cup of water and sat beside her. They listened to the wind move through the grass. Never thought I'd know what stillness meant, he said. It's not quiet, she replied. It's full. He nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her brow. You gave this place its shape. They watched the horizon turn gold. No wagons passed. No smoke rose beyond their own chimney. Just the sound of insects settling into the brush. That fall, they harvested the beans enough to dry and store, with some left for seed. Porter caught 2 wild hens near the creek and built a pen beside the lean-to. Jovie found a length of ribbon in an old sewing box and tied it around Maribel's wrist. When winter returned, they were ready. The walls were double-lined with canvas. A woodpile stood chest-high behind the cabin. Inside, the cradle had been moved beside the hearth. Maribel stood now, fingers gripping the edge, her hair a soft auburn that caught the firelight. On the first snow, Porter brought in a flat stone from the ridge and placed it on the mantel. For what we've built, he said, setting a sprig of holly beside it. That night, Jovie curled against him beneath the quilt she'd pieced from old flannel and cotton scraps. Maribel slept between them in the cradle, one hand open to the ceiling. We've got all we need, Jovie whispered. Porter kissed her temple, then her mouth, slow and sure. They slept warm, the wind outside no longer a thing to fear. Years later, that same cradle held another child, a boy with his mother's eyes and his father's hands. The lean-to became a second room. The bean rows stretched longer, and the date above the hearth carved into the beam never faded. They lived each day quiet and full, side by side, in the home they made from nothing but earth, sweat, and gentleness. And they never once looked back.